So picture this. What would you do if some random guy in a fake uniform walked up and slapped your wife right in front of everyone? Well, for Jack Donnelly, this retired Navy SEAL, the answer was pretty obvious. You fight back. And boy, what happened next had the whole neighborhood talking. That slap was way louder than it should have been. It wasn't just noise. It was like lighting a match in a powder keg. This whole thing went down on a regular afternoon in Round Rock, Texas. You know how it is. Neighbors watering their grass, kids riding bikes, just normal suburban stuff. Then suddenly, everything just stopped, like someone hit pause on the whole world. This guy, Trevor Langley, was standing there in his fake HOA uniform, towering over Hannah Donnelly. She's got her hand on her cheek, face all red from pain and anger. All she was doing was trimming her roses in her own damn yard, and this creep just hit her. What Trevor didn't know was that Hannah's husband, Jack, a Navy SEAL with 20 years under his belt, was right there watching the whole thing. Jack went ice cold, but not from fear. It was that scary kind of calm that only comes from years of training. He'd been in fights, survived attacks, carried wounded soldiers to safety. But nothing compared to the rage he felt watching some stranger hit his wife on their own front lawn. "Did you just hit my wife?" Jack's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a knife. Trevor actually laughed, this nervous, fake kind of laugh, and looked back at his two buddies. They were wearing the same cheap uniforms with plastic badges that looked like they came from a toy store. "She was breaking the rules," Trevor said with this nasty smirk. "Someone's got to keep people in line around here." "Keep people in line?" Jack stepped closer, his eyes locked on Trevor. "You think hitting women is keeping people in line? All the neighbors were watching now. Mrs. Reynolds from across the street whispered to her husband, "I knew this was going to happen eventually. They've been pushing everyone around." Her husband pulled her back toward their house. Nobody wanted to get caught up in whatever was about to go down. Hannah tried to calm things down. "Jack, don't," she said, still holding her cheek. Her voice was shaking but firm. She wasn't telling him to stop exactly. She was telling him to be careful. She knew what her husband could do, and she could see in his eyes that he'd flipped that switch. Trevor got cocky, thinking Hannah was scared. "You people don't get it. We run this place now. Break the rules. Face the consequences." Jack's mouth curved into something that definitely wasn't a smile. "Consequences? For hitting my wife? You're about to find out what real consequences look like." Before Trevor could even blink, Jack moved. No wasted time, no hesitation. 1 second he was standing there, the next Trevor's arm was twisted behind his back and he was going down. The other two fake security guys rushed Jack, but he was ready. A quick kick sent the first one flying onto the grass, gasping for air. The second guy swung wild, but Jack just stepped aside, grabbed his wrist and yanked him down hard. People in the crowd were gasping, covering their mouths. Some were even clapping quietly. See, for months these fake HOA guys had been strutting around like they owned everything, and nobody had the guts to stand up to them. Until now. Trevor was face down in the dirt with Jack leaning over him. "You're done," Jack said quietly, each word clear as day. "You're never putting your hands on her or anyone else ever again." The other two scrambled to their feet, all beat up and embarrassed, trying to figure out if they should run or keep fighting. But Jack's stare had them frozen. They knew they were beaten. Some teenager across the street was recording everything on his phone. "Yo, this is insane," he whispered, catching the whole thing that would spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Hannah stood there in the middle of it all, still hurting but standing strong. Her eyes were full of pride and relief. She'd seen her husband in soldier mode before, once when he came home from deployment and had a nightmare. But this wasn't a dream. This was happening right here on their front lawn. As Trevor whimpered under Jack's grip, you could hear sirens getting closer. Someone had called the cops. More people came out to watch, whispers getting louder. The whole power balance in the neighborhood had just shifted in one afternoon. Jack loosened his grip on Trevor just enough to let him breathe, but kept him pinned down. "You better hope those sirens are for you," he muttered, "because if they're not, I'm not done yet." The sirens got louder, turning onto their street with flashing red and blue lights bouncing off all the houses. The big question everyone was thinking was just starting to form. Who exactly were these guys, and how had they gotten away with pretending to be in charge for so long? But before anyone could get answers, the Donnellys had to explain how this whole mess started in the first place. When Jack and Hannah packed up their stuff in Plano, Texas, they weren't running away from anything. They were running toward something better. After Jack's 20 years as a Navy SEAL, he was done with deployments, done with crappy hotel rooms that smelled like dust, done with nights where you could barely sleep. Hannah had stuck by him through all of it, waiting, worrying, raising their 2 kids who were now off at college. They wanted a house where they could actually breathe, where they'd wake up to birds singing instead of alarm clocks and military briefings. This neighborhood in Round Rock looked perfect. Nice, wide streets with big oak trees, neat lawns, a park right around the corner, and friendly families walking their dogs. Their house was on a corner lot. Nothing fancy, but it had charm, with a porch swing that Hannah claimed as her evening tea spot the minute she saw it. On their first night, she whispered, "It feels like we can finally breathe here." Jack kissed her forehead and thought, yeah, maybe they really could. At first, everything really was peaceful. The Donnellys unpacked their boxes, met some neighbors, and got used to the slower pace of suburban life. Jack started his morning runs through the neighborhood trails. Hannah spent her afternoons working in her flower beds, getting her hands dirty planting roses like she was planting roots for their new life. But peace is fragile, and it doesn't take much to break it. The first time Jack saw them, it was a Sunday morning. He was jogging back home when he spotted 3 guys in matching uniforms, navy polo shirts with HOA security stitched in white letters. They didn't look like real police uniforms, not even close, but they had utility belts with flashlights, radios, and what looked like pepper spray. One of them stopped in front of a neighbor's house and started writing stuff down on a clipboard while lecturing a young couple about putting their trash cans out too early. Jack slowed down, watching from across the street. His gut told him something was off. These guys were too aggressive, too stiff. They weren't volunteers helping with community rules. They acted like they owned the place. That night over dinner, Jack told Hannah what he'd seen. "They're calling themselves security," he said, shaking his head. "But I don't buy it. Looks like some kind of power trip." Hannah frowned. "You think they're real? Like the HOA actually hired them?" "Maybe, but they don't look trained. More like guys who ordered uniforms off the internet." Jack pushed his plate away. "I don't like it." The next week, Hannah had her own run-in with them. She was walking back from getting the mail when one of the guys, she'd later find out his name was Trevor Langley, stopped her right there. He looked at her mailbox, then at her, and said, "Paint's peeling. That's a violation. You've got 10 days to fix it or you'll get fined." Hannah blinked. "Excuse me? The HOA's been here before, but they usually send letters. They don't send people walking around door to door." Trevor leaned in way too close. "That's how it used to work. We're stepping things up now. We're not afraid to enforce the rules anymore." She told Jack about it that evening, and you could hear the irritation in her voice. "He talked to me like I was some kind of criminal, over paint." Jack's jaw got tight. "I'll handle it. Don't let them push you around." But when he called the HOA office the next day, the lady on the phone sounded confused. "Sir, we don't have a security team. We've never had one. If someone's claiming that, they're not with us." That's when the air shifted for Jack. He'd dealt with liars before, with guys pretending to be something they weren't, and he knew how dangerous it could be to let them keep operating. Soon after, neighbors started dropping hints, talking in hushed voices. The Reynolds across the street admitted the fake HOA cops had threatened to fine them for having too many lawn decorations. The Parkers said one of the guys yelled at their teenage son for playing basketball in the driveway after 9 p.m. Everyone had a story, but nobody had stood up to them. Fear had settled over the whole neighborhood like a heavy blanket. One evening, Jack was outside watering the lawn when he saw Trevor again, clipboard in hand, pointing at another neighbor's car parked on the curb. Jack called out, "Hey, you work for the HOA?" Trevor straightened up with that same smirk. "We work for the community. Someone has to keep things in order." Jack didn't like the way he said it, all arrogant and threatening. But he also knew that going in too fast could make things worse. He needed to watch, wait, gather information before taking action. Hannah couldn't hide how uneasy she felt. "It feels like they're circling us," she whispered one night as they sat on the porch swing. "Like they're just waiting for someone to push back." Jack squeezed her hand. "Let them circle. They have no idea who they're dealing with." But Hannah didn't know how soon that pushback would come, or how ugly it was going to get. By their third week in the new house, the Donnellys started hearing the stories in bits and pieces. Nobody talked about it loudly or told the whole story at once. It was more like whispered gossip shared when no one else was around. At first, Jack thought people were making it sound worse than it was, but the more he listened, the more it all added up. Something was rotting in this neighborhood, and it wore a cheap navy polo with HOA security stitched on the front. Hannah was the first one to really pick up on the whispers. She was returning a pie dish to Margaret Reynolds, their elderly neighbor across the street, when Margaret lowered her voice and said, "Those men came here last month, told me my curtains didn't match the exterior paint scheme, said if I didn't replace them, I'd get fined $100. Hannah blinked. "Your curtains? How would that even be a rule?" "That's exactly what I asked," Margaret said, glancing nervously at her front window like the guys might suddenly show up. "But when I questioned it, one of them leaned over my porch rail and said, 'Rules are rules. Don't make us come back.'" Hannah felt a chill run down her spine. She thanked Margaret, but the story bothered her all afternoon. When she told Jack later, he let out a slow breath through his nose. "That's intimidation," he said flatly. The next whisper came from the Parkers. Their teenage son, Devin, had been shooting hoops one night when one of the fake security guys walked up and told him to knock it off. Devin, who was 17 and lanky, just shrugged and kept bouncing the ball. The guy snatched it and threw it into the bushes, growling, "Driveways aren't for games. Consider this your warning." When Jack heard that, he shook his head. These guys aren't just pretending. They're getting more aggressive. Word spread further. The Chen family down the street had their mailbox tagged with a fake citation notice, signed by HOA enforcement. It claimed their front bushes were non-compliant. Mr. Chen, who'd lived there over 10 years, went to a real HOA board meeting to ask about it. The board members were confused. "We've never issued a letter like that," they told him. That's when Jack knew for sure. The Donnellys weren't dealing with some overzealous neighborhood watch. They were dealing with con artists running a fake authority scam. One Saturday afternoon, Zeke and Hannah were sitting on their porch when there was a soft knock at the side gate. It was Carla Park, a woman in her 40s who lived 2 houses down. She looked nervous but relieved to see them. "I heard what happened the other day," Carla said, shifting from foot to foot. "With Trevor talking to you about the mailbox." Hannah nodded slowly. "You've dealt with them too?" Carla let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, we all have. Everyone on this street. They told me my kids' bikes had to be stored inside or we'd get fined. When I asked for the rule in writing, one of them got in my face and said, 'Don't test us.' My husband wanted to report it, but we've seen how aggressive they can get. It's easier to just give in. Jack leaned forward, elbows on his knees. You've all been letting them push you around because you're scared? Carla's eyes dropped. We don't have military training like you, Jack. We're just regular people trying to live here. Jack softened his tone. You don't need training to tell the truth. You just need to stand together. Bullies only win when nobody pushes back. Carla gave him a small, grateful smile before heading home. But Jack could see the weight she was carrying. The same weight hanging over the whole street. Everyone pretending nothing was wrong because standing up felt too dangerous. That evening, Hannah tried to lighten the mood with a home-cooked dinner, but Jack barely touched his food. He kept staring out the window, his mind elsewhere. You're thinking about them again, Hannah said softly. I can tell. I can't help it, Jack admitted. They're preying on good people who don't know how to fight back. It's only a matter of time before something worse happens. Hannah set down her fork. What if we just kept our heads down? Stayed out of it? Jack turned to her, his expression hard. If we do that, then we're no better than everyone else letting it happen. And the day they lay a hand on someone, that'll be the day everything changes. Hannah didn't answer. She knew he was right, but she also knew how far Jack was willing to go when he got pushed. Later that night, as they sat on the porch swing, a car slowed down and stopped in front of their house. The window rolled down, and Trevor's voice carried across the street. Pretty flowers, Mrs. Donnelly. Be a shame if someone reported them for blocking the walkway. Jack stood up, every muscle tense, but before he could move, the car sped off with laughter echoing into the night. Hannah grabbed his arm. Please, she whispered, don't start something yet. Jack clenched his jaw, staring at the fading taillights. His voice was low but certain. They just did. But before Jack could take action, the confrontation would come right to his doorstep in a way nobody expected. The first time Jack went face-to-face with Trevor Langley, it wasn't planned. It was a Tuesday afternoon, hot enough that you could see heat waves rising off the pavement. Jack had just gotten back from the grocery store when he noticed Trevor and his two buddies parked in front of the Chen's house again. Trevor had his clipboard out, circling their front yard like a vulture, writing stuff down while muttering to the couple about their non-compliant shrubbery. Jack set his grocery bags on the hood of his truck and walked over. Hey, he called out, his voice steady but firm. What exactly do you think you're doing? Trevor turned around with that quick smirk. Conducting inspections. Standard HOA security procedure. You wouldn't understand. Jack crossed his arms. Funny thing, I called the actual HOA office last week. They said they don't have a security team. So why don't you explain that? The two guys behind Trevor shifted uncomfortably, but Trevor didn't flinch. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. We're the ones keeping this place in order. The HOA doesn't have the guts to enforce the rules. We do. Jack let the silence hang for a moment. His stare didn't waver. Years of reading opponents in combat zones had taught him that the loudest guys were often the weakest. You walk around here in cheap uniforms, barking at people like you're cops. But I've been in places where real authority mattered. And trust me, you don't have it. Trevor's grin faltered, just for a second. Careful, Donnelly. This isn't the military. You don't get to call the shots here. I don't need to, Jack replied. But if you put your hands on one more neighbor, you'll wish you never set foot on this street. The standoff was thick enough to cut. Behind them, Mr. Chen stood frozen on his porch, his wife clutching his arm. Nobody moved. Then Trevor leaned in slightly, his voice low but taunting. We'll see how tough you are when your wife's the one breaking the rules. Jack's jaw flexed, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he stepped back and raised his voice just enough for the Chens to hear. If anyone gives you trouble again, you come straight to me. Don't let these clowns intimidate you. Trevor's eyes darkened. You just made yourself a target. Then aim carefully. Jack shot back before turning to grab his groceries. That night, Jack replayed the whole scene over and over. He told Hannah exactly what happened, not leaving anything out. Her face went pale when he repeated Trevor's words about her. He mentioned me? She asked quietly, setting her tea mug down with shaking hands. Jack reached across the table and covered her hand with his. They're bluffing. Bullies always do. But I'm not letting them near you. Jack, you can't fight everyone, she whispered. This isn't a battlefield. It's our home. It's both now, he answered. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with something Hannah had seen before during his deployments, the look of a man ready for whatever storm was coming. The next few days brought smaller fights. Trevor's crew left fake warning slips taped to mailboxes. They followed neighbors during evening walks, writing down violations on their clipboards. Once, Jack caught them lurking outside his own fence, pretending to measure the grass height. He walked out and stood silently on the porch until they left. Neighbors started noticing. Some whispered thanks to Jack when they passed by. Others avoided eye contact, too afraid of drawing the fake security team's attention. The street had become divided. Those who hoped Jack would protect them, and those who just wanted the problem to disappear on its own. One evening, as the sun set and painted the sky orange, Carla Park stopped by again. She spoke urgently, in hushed tones. Jack, you have to be careful. I overheard Trevor bragging. He said he was going to make an example out of someone this week. Jack's stomach tightened. Did he say who? Carla hesitated, then nodded. He mentioned Hannah. Jack felt the air leave his lungs in a slow, controlled breath. Thank you, Carla. I'll take it from here. That night, while Hannah slept, Jack sat in the living room with the lights off, staring out at the street. Every sound outside caught his attention. A car door, a dog barking, footsteps on the sidewalk. His instincts screamed at him to act, but he knew rushing in too early could backfire. He muttered to himself, barely audible. If he lays a finger on her, I won't hold back. But Trevor wasn't planning on waiting long. His so-called example would happen sooner than anyone imagined. Saturday afternoon had this weird tension in the air. It was warm, that sticky Texas heat that clings to your clothes, but Hannah felt restless enough to keep herself busy. She put on her wide-brimmed hat, grabbed her gardening gloves, and went out to trim the rose bushes along the front walkway. Gardening always calmed her nerves. The simple act of shaping the blooms, of bringing order to nature, reminded her of the peace they'd come here to find. She was kneeling by the flower bed, clipping carefully, when a shadow fell across the grass. Hannah looked up, and there he was, Trevor Langley, standing way too close. His clipboard was tucked under his arm like some kind of badge of honor. Two of his fake officers hung back near the sidewalk, arms crossed. "Afternoon, Mrs. Donnelly," Trevor drawled. "Looks like we've got a problem here." Hannah straightened slowly, brushing dirt off her gloves. "What kind of problem?" "HOA Regulation 12C," Trevor said, tapping his clipboard. "No landscaping that blocks a walkway. Your roses are creeping out too far. Someone could get scratched." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Those roses have been here since we moved in. Nobody's complained. And as far as I know, the HOA doesn't send men like you door to door." Trevor's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Times change. We're cracking down. If you don't fix this by tomorrow, there'll be a fine." Hannah crossed her arms, standing her ground. "You don't scare me, Trevor. I called the HOA myself. They said you're not official. You're just pretending." The smirk dropped from his face. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you're brave, huh? Talking back? Maybe your husband filled your head with that Navy toughness, but you're not him." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her tone steady. And you're not security. You're a bully in a polo shirt. Trevor's jaw twitched. For a second, he just stared at her, the air thick with his anger. Then it happened, fast and ugly. His hand came up and cracked across her cheek. The sound was sharp, brutal, louder than the chirping insects. Gasps erupted from across the street. Mrs. Reynolds, who was watering her lawn, dropped her hose. Carla Park froze on her porch, hand covering her mouth. The slap wasn't just physical. It was a public act, meant to humiliate, to dominate. Hannah staggered back, her hand flying to her cheek. Pain seared across her face, but she refused to let tears fall. She stared at Trevor, her voice shaking but fierce. "You'll regret that." And that's when she heard the voice she knew better than her own heartbeat. "Did you just hit my wife?" Jack had been standing on the porch, arms folded, watching the whole thing. He'd held himself back, giving Hannah space to stand her ground. But when Trevor struck her, something inside Jack snapped into sharp focus. Trevor turned, forcing a laugh. She was out of line. Somebody had to put her in check. Jack stepped forward, his movement slow, deliberate. Somebody? You think you're somebody? You just made the biggest mistake of your life. The other two fake officers shifted nervously. One whispered, "Trevor, maybe we should back off." "Shut up!" Trevor snapped, trying to keep control, but his voice cracked just enough to give him away. Jack closed the disc. Ants, stopping just inches from Trevor. His voice was calm, almost eerily so. "You've got two choices. Apologize to her right now, or I make sure you never touch anyone again." Trevor sneered. "You think you scare me, soldier boy? You're retired. You're nothing now." That was the last straw. Jack's fist shot forward, connecting with Trevor's jaw. The man stumbled back and hit the ground hard. Before the others could react, Jack moved like lightning. He grabbed the first one by the collar, twisting his arm and flipping him onto the grass with a grunt. The second one swung wildly, but Jack blocked it and delivered a sharp elbow that sent the man sprawling. Neighbors gasped. Some cheered under their breath. For months they'd lived under the shadow of these fake cops. Now they were watching them fall apart in seconds at the hands of someone who'd finally had enough. Trevor groaned, clutching his jaw as Jack towered over him. "You think this is over?" Trevor spat blood onto the pavement. Jack leaned down, his voice low and controlled. "It's over when I say it's over. And trust me, it's over." The sirens came, faint at first, then louder. Blue and red lights flashing down the street. Someone had already called the police. Neighbors gathered, murmuring, phones recording every detail. Hannah, still holding her cheek, walked over and placed a hand on Jack's arm. Her touch softened him instantly, grounding him. She whispered, "I'm okay. You did what you had to do." Jack turned to her, eyes still hard but filled with something else now. Love, protection, fury barely contained. He kissed her forehead gently before straightening again, waiting for the officers to arrive. But while the police would soon reveal the fake cops for what they were, the neighborhood itself was about to split wide open. The police sirens were still blocks away when Jack Donnelly shifted his stance, ready for whatever came next. Trevor Langley was on the ground, clutching his jaw, blood running down his chin. His two sidekicks stumbled around like amateurs, one holding a spray, behind wrist, the other trying to catch his breath after taking a knee to the ribs. Neighbors poured out onto porches and sidewalks. Phones were raised, recording everything. This wasn't just a neighborhood argument anymore. It was a public showdown, and Jack stood right in the middle of it. Trevor spat onto the grass and struggled to his feet. His arrogance hadn't left him, but his voice shook when he said, "You think you're some kind of hero? You think people are going to thank you for this? You don't know who you're messing with." Jack took one step closer, his presence alone silencing the street. "No," he said, his voice calm and cold. "You don't know who you're messing with. You laid your hands on my wife. That's something you don't walk away from." Trevor's buddies made one last try at rushing him, but Jack's training kicked in. He moved with precision, no wasted motion. The first guy swung blindly. Jack sidestepped, grabbed his wrist, and twisted until the man cried out in pain, dropping to his knees. The second one lunged forward, but Jack countered with a sharp strike to the chest that sent the air whooshing out of him. He collapsed onto the grass, wheezing, hands clutching his ribs. The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Some neighbors cheered quietly. Others covered their children's eyes. Hannah stood a few feet back, her hand still pressed to her stinging cheek, watching her husband transform into the man she'd only seen in glimpses, the soldier who knew how to end a fight in seconds. Jack knelt beside Trevor, who was now trembling more from fear than pain. His voice dropped to a growl. "You ever lay a hand on her again, or anyone else in this neighborhood, and you won't be worrying about fines. You'll be worrying about walking." Trevor tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. "You don't scare me," he muttered, though his eyes darted nervously to the crowd. Jack leaned closer. "Then let me make this clear. I don't bluff." The sound of sirens grew louder, lights bouncing off the houses as police cars turned onto the street. The fake cops froze, their earlier bravado melting away. One of the neighbors, Carla Park, stepped forward. Her voice was shaky but determined. "I saw it. He slapped her. We've all seen what they've been doing." She pointed at Trevor. "He's been harassing us for months." Other voices rose behind her. Mr. Chen shouted, "They came after me and my wife. Said we owed fines that didn't exist." Mrs. Reynolds added, "They threatened me over my curtains. I've been afraid to say anything." The officers pulled up, tires crunching on the asphalt, doors flying open. Two deputies stepped out, hands resting on their holsters. One of them, Officer Ramirez, took in the scene with wide eyes. The three fake cops battered and bruised, Jack standing tall in the middle of the yard, neighbors surrounding him. "What happened here?" Ramirez demanded. Before Jack could answer, Carla spoke up again. "Those men aren't HOA security. They're fakes. They've been terrorizing this street, and today she pointed at Trevor, hit Hannah Donnelly right in the face." Ramirez turned to Jack. "Sir, is that true?" Jack nodded. "My wife was trimming the roses. He came at her with some nonsense about violations, then struck her. I stepped in." Hannah stepped forward, her voice clear despite the redness on her cheek. "He hit me in front of everyone." Ramirez's jaw tightened. He turned toward Trevor. "You got anything to say to that?" Trevor opened his mouth, but no words came out. The other deputies moved in, patting the men down, pulling fake IDs from their pockets and stripping off the knockoff badges. One deputy shook his head. "These are bogus, not even close to real." As the fake cops were lined up against the squad car, the neighbors buzzed with relief and anger. Months of bottled-up fear came pouring out in overlapping voices. "They threatened my kid! They tried to fine us for nothing! We were scared to even go outside!" Jack stood quietly, his eyes on Hannah. She gave him a small nod, proud, grateful, but shaken. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, steadying her, as if to remind her she wasn't alone. Ramirez approached Jack. "We'll need to take statements. Looks like you did a number on them." Jack's tone was steady. "I didn't hit them until after they put their hands on my wife." Ramirez studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Given the witnesses, I don't think you'll have much to worry about." Behind them, Trevor was shoved into the back of a police car. His face was twisted in rage. "This isn't over!" he shouted, his voice muffled by the car door slamming shut. Jack didn't even flinch. He just stared at the car as it pulled away, his arms still wrapped protectively around Hannah. But as the blue and red lights faded down the street, the neighbors knew the fight wasn't just about three fake cops. It was about taking back their community from fear. When the squad cars pulled away with Trevor and his crew in the back, he neighborhood didn't scatter like it usually did after police business. People hung around in clusters on the sidewalks, whispering, shaking their heads, replaying what they'd just seen. For months, everyone had avoided confrontation, tiptoeing around the men in the fake uniforms. Now the silence had been shattered, and the street buzzed with a different kind of energy, anger mixed with relief. Hannah leaned against Jack, still holding her cheek. He guided her gently toward the porch steps, but before they could sit down, Carla Park walked up to them. Her voice trembled, but there was fire in her eyes. "You did what we've all been too scared to do. I don't know how to thank you." Jack shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just don't stay quiet anymore. That's how people like them get away with it." Carla glanced at Hannah's cheek, her expression darkening. "I should have spoken up sooner. We all should have." Other neighbors gathered closer. Mr. Chen stepped forward, clearing his throat. "They came to my house 3 times. Said my mailbox was out of compliance. I paid them $50, thinking it was real. My wife told me not to, but I didn't want trouble." His shoulders slumped with shame. "You're not the only one," Mrs. Reynolds added quickly. "They got me for $200 over curtains. I was afraid they'd vandalize my house if I didn't pay." The crowd got louder with overlapping confessions, fake fines, threats of property damage, harassment of kids playing outside. Every story added another layer to the picture. A neighborhood held hostage by men who had no authority, only intimidation. Jack listened, arms crossed, eyes scanning the group. When the voices finally quieted, he said, "You all knew something was wrong, but fear kept you in line. I get it. Not everyone's trained to push back, but silence is what gave them power." From the back of the crowd, a voice called out. It was Tom Alvarez, a neighbor Jack had barely spoken to before. "Easy for you to say. You're a SEAL. You've been through combat. The rest of us, we've got jobs, families. We can't afford to get hurt or dragged into fights." Jack locked eyes with him. "I'm not asking anyone here to fight. I'm saying stop pretending nothing's wrong. Report it. Speak up. Stand with each other. One man standing alone can be ignored. A neighborhood standing together can't." Tom looked away, but the words hung in the air. Hannah spoke up then, her voice stronger than anyone expected. "When he hit me, I wasn't just hurt. I was humiliated. He wanted me to feel small. But I didn't. Because I knew Jack was right there. And because I know none of us should have to live in fear of men like that. If you let people like Trevor run things, they'll take and take until there's nothing left to give." There was a moment of silence. Then Margaret Reynolds stepped forward, leaning on her cane. "She's right. I've lived here 30 years. This is my home.